I rang the doorbell. No answer. A moment of hesitation, then I knocked harder. Still nothing. I exhaled sharply, a sense of regret creeping in. 2 months, 2 whole months with no contact, no rent payments. That wasn't like her at all. My tenant had always been reliable, punctual, quiet, but now, silence. Had she left? Moved somewhere else? Or had something happened? I knocked again, this time more impatiently. And then, click, the door swung open. But the person standing before me wasn't her. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, tanned. A presence that spoke of hard labor, or of someone who had battled life without rest. Deep, dark eyes. A sharp jawline, cutting through the light. His lips were slightly parted, as if he had just woken up. Thick black hair, slightly messy, as if someone had just run their fingers through it. I realized I was staring. And he knew it. A slow, lopsided smirk appeared on his face, as if he was enjoying this moment. "You're my tenant?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He leaned lazily against the doorframe, arms crossed over his chest. No. I waited for an explanation. But he just looked at me, his dark eyes unreadable. There was something about him that made my stomach tighten, not fear, but not quite reassurance either. "I'm looking for the woman renting this apartment," I said. "Where is she?" He tilted his head, observing me, as if weighing something in his mind. Then, without hurry, he stepped back, pushing the door open wider. It wasn't an invitation. It was an unspoken command. Despite every instinct warning me otherwise, I stepped inside. The apartment was dimly lit, carrying the scent of warm blankets mixed with a faint trace of antiseptic. And then, I saw her, my tenant, lying on the bed. Pale. Frail. Nothing like the composed, independent woman I once knew. Her eyes fluttered open. When she saw me, she struggled to sit up, her voice hoarse and weak. "Jennifer. I'm sorry, about the rent." I started to say, "Don't worry about that right now," as I raised a hand. "You should rest." She didn't hear me. The young man, Elijah, as he introduced himself, muttered something under his breath, arms still crossed. Up close, he was even more striking. The strong jaw, the smooth, deep-toned skin, a presence so naturally commanding that I found it hard to look away. "My mother has been sick for weeks," he said. "I came to take care of her." But then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's been tough. No insurance. Every penny goes to her medication." That's why, he trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. Normally, I would be furious about 2 months of unpaid rent. That was a problem. I wasn't the sympathetic type, I handled things by the book. But standing here, looking at his mother, looking at him, I heard myself say something that was completely unlike me. "Forget the rent." His head snapped up. "Focus on her," I continued. "If there's anything you need, anything I can do, just ask." Elijah stared at me. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't even breathe. Then, something in his expression softened, like I had just lifted a weight off his shoulders. I could have sworn, for half a second, that he looked like he wanted to pull me into an embrace. Instead, his lips parted, as if he was about to say something, maybe "thank you, maybe you don't have to do this." But before he could, I reached out and clapped his shoulder. His shoulder wasn't just a shoulder, it was solid, warm muscle beneath the thin fabric of his t-shirt. And suddenly, the air between us shifted. I felt it. He felt it. The corner of his mouth twitched, and I pulled my hand back like I had just touched a hot stove. Well, I stammered, suddenly aware of how small the room was. "Take care of her." Then I turned and walked out before I did something even more out of character. By the time I reached my car, my heart was pounding. What the hell was that? I wasn't kind. I didn't go around handing out sympathy and rent forgiveness like charity. And I definitely didn't react like that just from touching someone's shoulder. But as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to shake the strange warmth still lingering in my fingertips, I had to face it. There was something about Elijah that made me act really, really weird. I was halfway home before reality hit me. 2 months. 2 months of unpaid rent. And what did I do? Play Mother Teresa? Act like some kind of savior? That wasn't me. This apartment was my income. My only income. I wasn't some wealthy retiree doing charity work. If Elijah and his mother couldn't pay, I needed tenants who could. Simple as that. I turned the car around. This time, when I knocked, Elijah answered quicker. His expression was a mix of confusion and curiosity. "You're back," he said, leaning against the doorframe, those dark eyes scanning me. I crossed my arms. "I have the perfect solution for you." His eyebrow arched. "Do I? Why don't you both move in with me?" He blinked. "Where?" "My place," I said. "Big house. Too much space. You need a home." "I need paying tenants." I shrugged like it was the most logical thing in the world. 2 birds, 1 stone. Elijah just stared at me. Then, he let out a soft laugh and shook his head. Wait, let me get this straight. We can't afford rent in North Phoenix, and you're offering us a place in Biltmore? The neighborhood where all the big shots live? He narrowed his eyes at me, like I had just told him he won the lottery. We wouldn't be able to afford that in 100 years. I waved him off. "I'm not charging you." "Shut up." He rubbed his neck, still looking at me like he was waiting for the catch. "So let me get this straight," he said again. "You're letting 2 people, one of whom is sick, crash at your fancy house, for free?" "It is weird," I admitted. I shrugged again, trying to appear casual even though I had no idea what the hell I was doing. But I knew one thing, I wasn't doing this just out of kindness. There was something about Elijah. A connection. An energy. Maybe it was loneliness on my part. Maybe it was something else. But if giving his mother a place to stay meant keeping him close, I could live with that. Elijah turned to look at his mother, still lying in bed. He walked over, leaned down, and murmured something too quiet for me to hear. She looked at me, searching my face, then turned back to him. A few seconds passed. Then Elijah stood up, sighed, and looked at me. "This would be a huge favor," he said, his voice quieter now. "Like, you don't even know. It'd be like God sent you to us." "Don't get sentimental," I said, cutting him off before he could turn this into a heartfelt moment. "Just pack your stuff. I'll send movers." He exhaled sharply, shaking his head like he still couldn't believe it. "All right," he said. "We'll do it." And the moment I walked out of that apartment, I realized I was a little excited. Too excited, I pulled out my phone right on the street and called Rick, an old friend who ran a moving company. "Hey Rick, are you free tomorrow?" "Darling, I always am," he chuckled. "What's the job?" "Small move. Just a couple of people from North Phoenix to my place in Biltmore." There was a pause. "Your place?" "Yeah." Another pause. "Jennifer, are you adopting stray cats now?" I rolled my eyes. "Just book it for me, Rick." All right, he laughed. First thing in the morning. I hung up, feeling a rush of adrenaline surge through me. Elijah was moving in. And suddenly, the hours stretched endlessly as I got home. I paced too much, couldn't sit still. I'd lived alone for years, my house was quiet, my routines predictable. But now, knowing Elijah was coming, it was like something inside me had woken up. I went straight to the bathroom. If I was about to have company, I needed to look presentable. First, a long shower. Then, waxing. Smooth, silk-like legs. A full skincare routine. Exfoliating every inch. Even applying a little vanilla and honey-scented lotion. Halfway through, I caught my reflection in the mirror. What the hell was I doing? No matter how much I scrubbed, polished, and smoothed, I wasn't 20 anymore. Hell, I wasn't even, never mind. Age was just a number, except when it wasn't. I sighed, tossing the towel onto the counter. Lamb dressed as mutton, as they say. And yet, I kept going. The next morning, I was up before the sun. I made coffee, but barely drank it. My stomach was too tense. At 10 a.m., I called Elijah. "You ready?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Yeah," he said. "Movers just got here. We'll be there in an hour." 1 hour. 60 minutes. The longest countdown of my life. I fluffed the pillows on the couch. Adjusted the vase on the dining table. Checked my reflection at least 5 times. Then finally, the doorbell rang. I froze. It rang again. I took a deep breath, smoothed my shirt, and walked to the door, heart pounding. I opened it. Elijah stood on the threshold, broad shoulders filling the space, wearing a plain white t-shirt. His skin glowed under the Arizona sun, those dark eyes locking onto mine. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, slowly, easily, he grinned. "This is something else," he said, glancing around. I stepped aside, forcing a smile even as my pulse thundered. "Welcome home." Elijah and his mother arrived right on time. She sat in a wheelchair, wrapped in a thin cardigan, her face tired but gentle. Elijah stood behind her, pushing the chair, and right behind them were the movers, carrying the few belongings they had. Not much. Just a couple of suitcases. A small table. A few boxes. But I wasn't looking at the boxes. I was looking at them. The movers were young, built like they spent half their time lifting weights, maybe 25 at most. Arms tight with muscle, veins running down their forearms, sweat glistening under the Arizona heat. And Elijah. God help me. When he effortlessly picked up that table without a second thought, his biceps flexed, and I swear I forgot how to breathe. I saw the way his triceps tensed. The way his shirt stretched over his broad chest. A grown man, in his prime. Strong. I needed to cool down. So, like a good hostess, I went to the kitchen and made lemonade. A distraction. Something to keep my hands busy. When they finished, I handed out the drinks, watching them gulp it down. One by one, the movers left, clapping Elijah on the back before heading out. And then, it was just the two of us. Elijah settled his mother into her room, made sure she was comfortable, and finally came back to the living room. He dropped onto the couch, chest rising and falling, his skin damp with sweat, his shirt clinging to his body. And I couldn't not stare. I sat next to him. Too close. Maybe way too close. I reached out, touching his hand. He looked at me, surprised, but didn't pull away. "You don't have to worry about anything anymore," I said softly. "I'm here." I was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Close enough to see the tiny beads of sweat at his temple. For a second, he just looked at me. Then, quickly, I stood up. "Wait here," I said. I walked down the hallway, grabbed a clean towel, and came back. Holding it out. "Come on. Let's get you freshened up." He blinked. "Huh?" I didn't give him a chance to argue. I led him to the bathroom, stepping inside with him. Very close. Close enough to feel the heat of his body against mine. "This is the shower," I said, reaching out to twist the handle. Water sprayed against the glass. "This is hot." I turned it again. "This is cold." He barely heard me. His chest rose and fell just a little faster now. His eyes locked onto mine. I knew I was pushing a boundary. I didn't care. With one slow inhale, I finally stepped back. "I'll let you get freshened up," I murmured. I slipped out the door. Closed it behind me. And exhaled, pressing my back against the wall. What the hell was I doing? I didn't know. I just knew I wanted more. Minutes passed, then the bathroom door opened. Elijah stepped out, steam curling behind him, a towel loosely wrapped around his waist. I swallowed hard. His skin was damp, beads of water trailing down his abs, his shoulders looking even broader now. His chest sculpted. His body, pure, solid muscle. And then it happened. He moved too fast, maybe in embarrassment, rushing toward his room, and the towel slipped. It hit the floor. My jaw dropped. I'd seen men before. I'd been with men. But this was different. He turned for just a second, long enough for me to catch a glimpse, before he snatched the towel and disappeared into his room, door shutting behind him. I stood there. Frozen. He'd been here less than an hour, and I had already lost control. I stepped outside onto the front porch. The cool evening air did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I sat on the bench, staring at the empty street, replaying everything that had just happened. What the hell was I doing? I was 60 years old. He was 25. This was ridiculous. I had never acted this way before. I never let myself get carried away by feelings without thinking them through. I wasn't the kind of woman who did impulsive, reckless things. And yet, here I was, inviting a young, beautiful man into my home. Practically offering him my whole world on a silver platter. Was it loneliness? Was it just the fact that I finally had someone here, with me? Or was it something darker? Something selfish? I didn't know. And I didn't want to think too hard about it. That was when I noticed Elijah moving through the living room, stretching his arms, glancing around like he was getting used to the space. And suddenly, an idea struck me. I stood up and stepped inside, clearing my throat. Elijah, can you help me with something? He turned, raising an eyebrow. Sure. What is it? I led him to the library, one of my favorite places in the house. Dark wooden shelves, warm golden light, the scent of old pages filling the air. But the top shelves were just high enough that even Elijah, tall as he was, had to stretch to reach them. I pointed up. I need those books up there. He stepped forward, reaching up, fingers skimming the spines, but he missed. Damn, he muttered, lowering his arm. Higher than I thought. I bit my lip. This was exactly what I wanted. Well, I said, pretending to think. How about this? You lift me up, and I'll grab them. He hesitated. Lift you? Yes. I folded my arms. I'm not that heavy, am I? No. That's not what I meant, he said quickly, flustered. I pointed again. Well? Sure. Okay. He stepped closer. His hands found my waist. And instantly, I felt his strength. Effortlessly, he lifted me, his grip firm, his body close, too close. I pretended to fumble with the books just to make the moment last, feeling the way his breath hitched, the nervous energy rolling off him. He wasn't used to this. Neither was I. But he held me, steady, safe, until I finally pulled down the books. Got them, I announced. He lowered me, his hands lingering for just a second before he finally let go. Feet back on the ground, I turned, reaching up to pinch his cheek playfully. Good boy. He let out a nervous chuckle, rubbing the back of his neck. I walked to the small lounge chair in the library, flipping through the book in my hands. Delta of Venus. I smirked. Perfect. I love reading these kinds of novels, I said casually. Elijah glanced at the cover. Yeah? What's it about? I raised an eyebrow. Why don't I read it to you? He shrugged. Okay. I like listening. Poor guy had no idea what he was about to hear. I flipped to one of the stories and began reading, my voice soft, steady, letting the words settle into the air. At first, he just listened, sitting across from me, his expression neutral. But then, the story deepened. The words grew richer. Darker. More sensual. I glanced up at him, watching. Waiting. And there it was, the shift. The slight tension in his jaw. The way he suddenly adjusted his seat. The way he cleared his throat, pretending not to be affected. Oh, he was affected. I let my voice dip lower, my gaze flicking up now and then, catching the way his fingers tapped against his knee, the way he swallowed hard. I smirked. This was fun. Tapping the book lightly against my palm, I pretended to think. You know, Elijah. I crossed one leg over the other. I've always admired people who know how to handle hunger. Elijah, sitting across from me, shifted slightly. Hunger? His voice wasn't steady anymore. I nodded, still staring at him. Not the kind you satisfy with food. His Adam's apple bobbed. I let the silence stretch between us, watching the way his fingers twitched on his knee, like he wasn't sure where to put them. He was nervous. Adorable. I tilted my head, smiling. You look like you want to say something, Elijah. Don't tell me you're suddenly shy. He exhaled a short laugh, shaking his head. Sometimes you surprise me. I grinned. Keeps things interesting. Standing, I walked to the bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines. You remember that part, I mused, where the woman, what was her name? Ah, right. Elena. She challenges the man to close his eyes and trust her. I turned, lifting my chin. Do you trust me, Elijah? His breathing had quickened. I do. I clapped my hands together. Perfect. Close your eyes. He hesitated, then exhaled and obeyed. Slowly, I stepped closer, watching the way his jaw tensed. Then, carefully, deliberately, I reached out and traced my fingers down his forearm. He stiffened. You're so tense, I teased, leaning in. Relax. This isn't a horror story. He exhaled, his lips twitching into something close to a smile. Feels like one. Oh, come on. It's literature. I whispered against his ear. Let me show you the best parts. His eyes snapped open. And in that moment, he saw it. The shift. The surrender. The quiet, unspoken desire neither of us had dared to name, until now. He smiled. And then, finally, he closed the space between us. There, in the library, surrounded by the words of long-dead poets and scandalous novelists, we let a new story unfold.